Today, we're going to be talking about Radeon Image Sharpening. I've heard this described by many as just a simple sharpen filter that just smear over the top and everything becomes sharper. But I'm here to tell you that that's only partially true. You see, in this description, nobody really tells you when you're supposed to use it. Are you supposed to use it? Is it safe to use it? And more importantly, how do you use it most effectively? And the answer is yes. We'll just leave it at that, and we'll explain right after the intro. How's everybody doing today? My name is Wolfie. You're watching GreaterThanPie. So, Radeon Image Sharpening. How does it work? Well, it's not really CSI magic. It's not like we can punch in, zoom, enhance, and turn a smear into an actual object. In fact, it doesn't work like that at all. The way that Radeon Image Sharpening actually works is actually pretty simple. When a texture gets loaded into the GPU, it just kind of adjusts the contrast ever so slightly on the normal map to create a sharper looking image. It does this pretty much entirely through some basic code that it can implement across the board with almost no issues. There are some engines that don't like it, and when that happens, AMD actually has the feature automatically disabled on those engines and those games. A good example of this one is Jedi Fallen Order, which absolutely hates Radeon Image Sharpening to the point that turning it on or forcing it to be on can cause issues. That being said, the feature itself is pretty basic and has almost no power budget associated to it. But if it just made things sharper, why would AMD spend so much time and money working on it? Well, there is a bit of a reason for it, and surprisingly, it's not necessarily one that a lot of people talk about. You see, Radeon Image Sharpening exists to correct a very specific issue that many people who play older games understand. You see, when a game is developed, they create textures at a specific resolution, and that resolution is usually what's considered the target resolution of the game. A game can run at 1440p, but it may not have textures above 720p. And that is where something like Radeon Image Sharpening can actually step in. You see, I personally enjoy Elder Scrolls Online, but I know that a lot of those textures look pretty bad. In fact, I've got some footage of some up close and personal textures where I'm just like, oh, it just doesn't look good. But from afar with Radeon Image Sharpening enabled, it does look better. And that's because it's doing its job to make things look better. It's expanding the normal maps to make things look a little bit rougher, but then it's also kind of contouring and texturing things to make them look a bit sharper. It's doing some magic work here. It's not rocket science. In fact, I can do the same thing right now in this video, just can put a sharpen filter right over me, and I can over sharpen myself just as easily. But the GPU is doing this dynamically, which is why it's a feature in the drivers. So essentially, you can take something with a lower quality texture, run it through Radeon Image Sharpening, and get a pretty convincing result. There's another reason to use it that a lot of people don't necessarily know, and it's actually something I've personally used a couple different times. Some games can't run at 1440p. They can only run at 1080p or 720p, depending on how old they are. And in these titles, well, you're kind of stuck with a very blurry experience. I mean, heck, I talked about ESO. Sometimes that game decides to lock itself to 1080p, which isn't great. Something like Radeon Image Sharpening can be used to sort of bump that fidelity ever so slightly so that it doesn't look as blurry. And this is mainly an effect when you have a mismatched resolution versus your monitor. As things like 1440p monitors become more popular, you're going to see this a lot more. You may go back to a game and not really like how it looks after all these years, only to realize that the simple solution is just to bump that sharpen filter just a little bit. And when it comes down to actually being usable and safe, well, I'm happy to say that aside from the games that have issues with it, it's pretty safe to turn the feature on a game-by-game basis. You see, in some cases, you really don't want to use it. If you're running a game at a native resolution and it has a high texture quality, we'll use an example such as Fallout 4 with the 4K textures, you aren't necessarily going to see as big of a benefit from having Radeon Image Sharpening on. Even though it really doesn't affect your system all that much, it doesn't hurt to keep it off. Jedi Fallen Order is another example of a game that actually, it becomes a hindrance to have it on. And for the most part, that game looks pretty amazing as is and doesn't really benefit from it. But games like Borderlands can actually benefit quite a bit from actually having it on. The sharpness does benefit the insanely cartoony look that the Borderlands games go for. And if you've ever actually played Borderlands on max graphics, specifically Borderlands 3, that sharpness kind of like brings it back down a little bit. It's good. It ends up balancing everything out a little bit. And to be frank, not everything will look good with a sharpen filter on it. Some games that are supposed to be more cinematic actually are hindered by a sharpen filter because things like fake bokeh or fake depth of field effects can be thrown off by Radeon Image Sharpening. On the flip side, there are other features you can couple with Radeon Image Sharpening to actually kind of smooth out transitionals. So for example, there is a feature called Radeon Boost, which we'll actually talk about in another video at a later date. But what that does is it dynamically scales your resolution down in order to try to smooth out your frame rates. And by using something like Radeon Image Sharpening, you can make those transitions all the bit smoother because the jumps won't be nearly as high. And because Radeon Image Sharpening is already sharpening the whole image as is before it sends it out, it doesn't look as bad. But we'll talk more about that in a different video at a later date because we also have to talk about Radeon Boost 2.0, which is another even crazier, cooler thing that we can talk about. So in conclusion, should you turn on Radeon Image Sharpening? Well, the short answer is it depends. It can make something look better. If something's slightly blurry, try turning it on. See if it fixes that issue for you. If something doesn't look detailed enough because the game was created like 12 years ago, give it a shot. See if it helps. I mean, I've turned it on Oblivion. I've turned it on Borderlands 1 and 2. I've turned it on Borderlands 3. I've turned it on ESO. But I have not activated it on The Witcher. I did not use it on Jedi Fallen Order. And so when it comes down to it, much like any other feature in the GPU suite, it is always a better option to change it, test it, and see if it works for you. You might hate the way that it looks with sharpening, or you might like it. It's all preference. There is no right or wrong answer. All right, I'm gonna end this video here before I go on too long. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, you can leave a like, comment, subscribe. I do content like this all the time. And if you're not already subscribed, I am going to be doing a video about Radeon Boost in the near future. So thank you guys again. Wolfie out.